Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Chris Zappi. I'm a director in Amtrak's Host Railroads group, working to improve the on-time performance of Amtrak trains operating on host railroads. And Jay Fox, who leads the group, is also here today. We're really excited that we have the opportunity today to discuss an issue that's vital to the future of Amtrak. To kick things off, some of you may have seen that we recently released a brief video describing the relationship between Amtrak and its host railroads and why freight train interference is the largest cause of delay to Amtrak customers traveling on the national network. And in case you haven't seen it, we wanted to share it with you this morning.
Amtrak trains delayed for hours. Passengers delayed for 2 hours. Delays are the worst. Trust us. We know. We're proud to take Amtrak passengers where they need to go. Across the country, around the clock. 32 million people rely on Amtrak each year. Each passenger ready to sit back and enjoy the ride. But sometimes that ride is delayed, and it's time you knew why. Delays might happen because of weather, scheduled track maintenance, mechanical problems with our trains, or obstructions on the track. But usually, it's what we call freight train interference. That's when our trains are delayed by slower freight trains ahead of us. Amtrak owns most of the tracks in the Northeast Corridor, but almost all of the other rails are owned by freight railroad companies. By federal law, these host railroads have to let us use their tracks and prioritize passenger trains. But it doesn't always work out that way. When freight railroad companies move their trains first, it leaves Amtrak passengers waiting behind them. And that means missing important meetings, time with your family, or your next connection. Last year, freight trains delayed passengers more than 1.2 million minutes. That's over 2 years' worth of delays. Amtrak supports the vital work that freight railroads do, but passengers shouldn't have to wait for freight any longer. The law is on the books, but the freights often ignore it. Congress can fix that. Tell your member of Congress you have the right to be on time. Ask them to support legislation to put people before freight. Amtrak takes you where you need to go. Now let's get going.
All right, what'd you think? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. We were floored by the response to this video. In fact, it caused such a stir that trains are on time all over the network now. In fact, our latest report card gives all the Class 1s straight A's. We've heralded a new golden age of on-time trains. Yeah, at this point, I would thank you and bid you farewell if it wasn't for April Fool's Day. Yeah. Because the reality is, as you know, most customers on the national network continue to experience poor on-time performance on our trains. Grading the Class 1 hosts on the delays to Amtrak trains, only one host railroad, Canadian Pacific, received an A. And receiving an A is roughly correlated to trains that are at least 80% on time. That means that on only one of the Class 1 host railroads, on average, Amtrak passengers are on time 80% of the time. And in addition, on time is defined as arriving within 15 minutes of the public schedule. So we're grading on a large curve, and the average grade is still a C. Oops. So to bring home this point, this year we introduced pass-fail grades for each state-supported and long-distance route. For state-supported trains, a route received a pass if they were 80% on time or better at stations in 2018, and 17 of the 28 services did not meet the standard. Long-distance trains fared worse. With a lower standard of 70% on time to receive a pass, only one service, the auto train operating on CSX, met that standard. In fact, 10 of the 15 routes were late more often than they were on time in 2018. So you all are familiar with these issues, so what can we do? First, know that we strive to work collaboratively with all host railroads. Our operating teams are in direct contact with each host on a daily basis, and several Amtrak teams meet regularly with most hosts to discuss issues affecting Amtrak and identify opportunities for improvement. But we know from experience that our passengers benefit the most when there is a real possibility of enforcing Amtrak's right to preference. Right now, only the Department of Justice is entitled to bring a preference case against a host railroad, and we'd like the opportunity to do so as well, just as any other company could pursue a legal remedy when its rights are being violated. Yeah?
I just want to add, I'll just use my All right. We're good. All right. So I don't want that first point to be lost at all. That we work with the host railroads every day. Chris is in charge of the performance group. Chris has been working very closely with B and Santa Fe on initiatives in the Cascade to reduce delays. It's a joint initiative. Same thing on the San Joaquin service. Actually, the two of us are going to go down to Norfolk Southern in a couple of weeks to do an inspection tour on the Alabama division between Atlanta and Birmingham for the Crescent service. So that relationship is there. And it can be easy when you see a video like that. You could say, all right, this is a very conflicted type of situation, but it's not. It's not. We work very hard with them to try to turn things around. So I just don't want that to be lost on this group. This is what we have to do every day, and particularly in the host railroads group, we have to maintain that relationship because we have the business relationship with them. We have all their operating agreements with them.
So to that end, we're encouraging everyone to let their members of Congress know that, one, freight railroads are ignoring the law, and two, legislation is needed so that Amtrak can enforce the law and put people before freight. And we know that having an enforcement mechanism is essential based on historical experience. This chart plots the level of freight train interference across Amtrak's network since 2007. You can see that when PREA passed, freight train interference delays were more than halved. And when PREA 207 was ruled unconstitutional, delays doubled almost immediately. The pattern continued after Amtrak petitions the STB regarding the Capital Limited, and PREA 207 was ruled unconstitutional for a second time. A real threat of preference enforcement is the best way to reduce the largest cause of delays to Amtrak customers. Delays on Norfolk Southern have been particularly painful for customers. From September 2017 through 2018, delays caused by Norfolk Southern nearly doubled, mostly because of increased freight train interference delays. These delays are in large part why in 2018, 165,000 customers on the Capital Limited were an average of an hour and a half late, and 200,000 customers on the Crescent were an average of 2 hours late in 2018. That's more than 75% of the riders on those routes. So to keep customers updated on these delays, we have our Amtrak Alerts Twitter feed dedicated to providing customers with train status updates. And a few months ago, we began including the names of a few of the hosts in those tweets when one of their freight trains delays an Amtrak train. And after doing this for a while, we received a letter from Norfolk Southern asking us to cease and desist from this practice. And so in response, we provided them more information about the extreme delays our passengers face when traveling on their network and asked that they focus on reducing the freight train interference delays rather than the tweets that merely reference those delays. This caught the attention of the Wall Street Journal, which published a front-page news story on these tweets, the exchange of letters, and why Amtrak passengers have been delayed. Did everyone see this? But what we found was What we found was the most important outcome of these events was that the visible coverage of this issue appears to be highly correlated with a decline in Norfolk Southern freight train interference delays. And so on the Capital Limited and Lakeshore Limited, delays were fairly steady throughout the exchange of these letters. But as soon as the story was posted online, freight train interference delays declined, and since then have averaged about 37% lower than they were before the story was published, which is just further evidence that running Amtrak trains on time is a management decision made by freight railroads.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many people feel like this type of exchange by Amtrak, and as particularly the grades and what we published in the Wall Street Journal, the purpose is to shame the freights? Just curious, by a show of hands, how many people feel that? Right. To shame, is the purpose to shame the freights? So I'm going to respectfully disagree. I'm going to disagree. I think that our goal in our group is to get information out, to communicate, and to let people know what the truth is, what is happening on the network. And the response letter that went out, which Chris actually did a lot of work on with Bill Herman, who was the author of the response, it lists example after example after example after example of significant delays. So our job is not to shame the freights. As I said before, we're trying to work with them, and we do work with them every day. But we are, and you guys experience, I'm sure, yourselves as an RPA, our voice is not as loud. As loud. We want to be as loud, and we want to get ourselves in front of Congress and in front of the American people and let them know what's happening. So we do not see this as shaming. We see this as communicating.
So this issue is urgent and affects customers every day. So we're encouraging everyone to speak up on the issue. We've begun a push on social media to raise awareness on why trains are delayed and what we can do about it. Our tweet storm on the screen posted last Tuesday had hundreds of thousands of impressions just a few days after it was posted, and there's more to come. To close, we wanted to thank you all for your support as we work to have more customers arrive at their destination on time. In advance of you all taking the Hill this week, we do have a few printed copies of the report card and the frequently asked questions that we've heard about the report card and about delays to Amtrak trains in the back of the room. And you may also hear these questions asked of yourself as well. We know that freight railroads are ignoring the law and that legislation is needed so that Amtrak can enforce this law and put people before freight. And we look forward to taking your questions after Roger's presentation.